All right, Boker Tov, everybody. We are going to be stopping a few minutes early today. I need to get going. So thank you all for coming. Have a good day. Not that early. Probably about 10 minutes early because I need to be out of here soon-ish. Okay, so where we left off, I know I said this is an introduction to Pirke Avot, but it's really probably, as I say, at least 3 classes of Jewish history. Thank you. I actually have it written down this time. Jewish history that will lead us to Pirke Avot. I failed to mention last week, and it was not clear, but this is a continuing class in memory of Avigdor Chai Avram ben Rachel Leah Meir Tzvi, Zichrono Livracha, and all the learning we do should be L'ilui Nishmato. Someone once told me when I was teaching something similar, a Jewish history class many, many years ago, says, this isn't Torah. Why do you teach it? So I'm not going to get into that today, but I just want to reassure you that what we do as this introduction to Mishnah, introduction to Pirke Avot, is itself Torah, because the very beginning of Pirke Avot is this, Masorah. It's how we got the Torah from Har Sinai to today. So anyways, what I want to do is I want to just reiterate the thing I said at the end of last week's class, which I sent out on WhatsApp, that the Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi made this sea change in Judaism by writing down that which had been only verbally transmitted generation to generation, which was then is still known to this day as the Torah Shebe'al Peh, the oral law, even though it's written down. In order to do that, he divided again the Mishnayot into 6 sections. Zman Nakat. Zman Nakat is an acronym which not only means to take the time, it stands for Zra'im. Things have to do with, seeds, but things have to do with those mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz. Maser Rishon, Maser Sheni, Trumot, Maserot, Brachot. Then Zman Mem, Moed, Shabbat, Chagim. Nun is Nashim, marriage, divorce, Nidarim, other things related to husband and wife and to women. Nun, Nizikin, damages, torts. By the way, it's interesting, my father, Shalom, he was teaching, I don't know exactly what class he was teaching. It was a Sunday school class. It wasn't a religious school, 1,000 years ago. And in the class, he was teaching stuff having to do with Nizikin, about, this cow damaged this. And so he sent a letter to a judge locally. He said, I want to present you 3 cases, and I want you to tell me what is the court's ruling would be and what would be the basis. And he's used cars instead of animals. And all 3 cases come back to the cases in the Gemara, even though it's American law, but it's the same principle. Why is it in some states you lose your license after 3 infractions? Is the concept of a mu'ad, something, an animal that is known to do damage and will continue to do damage. Okay, so that was Nizikin. Nakat, Kuf, Kodashim, mostly about korbanot, sacrifices, and Tet Taharot, which has to do with Tuman Tara, ritual purity and impurity. If you know the answer to this, don't answer. For those who don't know the answer, where would you guess the little you may know or the lot you may know of Pirke Avot? What area of those 6 do you think Pirke Avot would be found in? What would you think, and why? I'll give you the why, but what do you think? Where is it? Nizikin? Is it Nashim? Is it Moed? Is it Zra'im? What would it be connected to? Because it kind of sounds, it's really an outlier. It doesn't really seem like it belongs to any of those. So where do you think the Chachamim included it? So if you do know the answer, feel free to call it out. Correct. Nizikin, damages. So that's a kind of a strange place to have that. It's the last Masechta in the last section in Nizikin. Because, as we will learn when we get to actually the beginning of the first parak of Pirke Avot, it's about interpersonal relationships, because that's what a lot of Pirke Avot is about, how we treat each other. And we can damage somebody if we don't know certain things that have to do with Pirke Avot. Okay, so we're going to talk about now this time period of the Mishnah. Again, the time period is approximately the year 10, meaning before destruction of Beit HaMikdash, to approximately the year 220. So about 210 years. That obviously spans 2 critical time periods in the world history. Number 1, Jewish history, is the latter stage of the second Beit HaMikdash into the destruction and beyond. and the birth of Christianity. And it's important to keep that in mind also in the back of our minds as we go through certain parts of Pirke Avot, because we'll see how certain statements were made that had to do with that time period. Much later, we're not, this is a Jewish history course. Again, we'll be doing a lot more on each person, but when we talk about the Rambam, which I will about next week or the week after, the Yud Gimli Karim, Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shlema, I believe with perfect faith, that is 13 statements of faith. Those, in most cases, are directed to beliefs in Christianity, the counter belief to it. So that's why they're phrased in such a way. Okay, so this time period is also known, the time period of the Mishnah is known as the time period of the Zugot. What are Zugot? Means pairs. We use the word Zug, Zugiyut, right? So Zugot are pairs. You know some of the names. Hillel and Shammai, Shmayana, Talyon. They were the pairs of the leaders of the Jewish people. After the death of Rabbi Yudah Nasi, before and after his death, during this time period, they were the leaders of Bavel. Now, Bavel, remember, if you remember just a little bit about Jewish history, the Jews had gone into exile into Babylonia, which eventually became Persia. This is now, we're talking about second Beit HaMikdash though right now, but there's still a large contingent of Jews left in Babylonia, the Hainu Persia, the Hainu Iraq of today. The two individuals who made a pair, they were functionaries of the Jewish people. One was that the Nasi, the head of the Beit Din Hagadol, the main authority, legal authority, and the other is the Av Beit Din, one like the chief justice. They each had, and he oversaw the Sanhedrin. So if you had two names like Shmayana, Talyon, Hillel, and Shammai, they each served one of those functions. In addition to that, you also had somebody else who comes, I think, a little bit later in history. I don't remember exactly when they had this. No, I think it's already in this time. Something called the Reish Galuta. The Reish Galutas, and he was the Rosh HaGalut, but someone who's considered the head, the not the political head. Oh yeah, more of a political head, and also was like the mayor or the president, or he had a function of politics. He had to make sure things were running, that there were roads and things. I'm putting in that terms like we understand, but not exactly that way. And it was in English. I've been told I pronounced it wrong in English. It's Exel Arch, not Exel Arch. But what do I know about English? And they were these Zugot, these pairs, were the ones who then promulgated and taught Mishnah, explained, and their names get mentioned hundreds and hundreds of times in Mishnah. Then we will see their names quoted right at the beginning of Pirke Avot, and it'll be in the order of the history in which they lived. Again, the people living at that time period, the rabbis of those time period, was called a Tana. Taf, Nun, Aleph, not Hey. Most times when you have a word in Hebrew that ends in the letter Hey, in Aramaic it ends in the letter Aleph. A Tana is from the word lishnot, to repeat, Shana. So it means, what was the purpose of the Tana? To repeat the teachings. That's why you're going to see two reasons. I'm going to jump right in for a second to something you're going to see in Pirke Avot a lot. There's a phrase that says, I don't know how many, I didn't count it. I can easily do it on the computer. Hu haya omer. He used to say. Now, if you look at almost every Mishnah in every other area, it says, Rabbi Yehuda omer, Rabbi Eliezer omer, so-and-so amar, he said, he says. It only seems to be in Pirke Avot, only, but I'd have to check, so I might be wrong. Hu haya omer. He used to say. So there's two possible reasons why it says that. Number one is this. Means that it was something he would repeat and repeat and repeat so that people would get the lesson and become part of them, even though this was still Torah shebichtav. They started to write it down, but it's still necessary to be transmitted. There's still to be some memory that went along with it. Because if I were to say to you 613, what do you think of? Mitzvahs, right? That's how many mitzvot there are, right? But I didn't tell you that. You know that because it's a key number, right? The number 7's key. The certain words are key. If you know a little bit background, Gemara, Yal Kigam, Yad Shachatan, there's certain acronyms that stand for something, and it puts you right away into a certain area of a Gemara. So they would used to say, but there's an additional reason to that. I'm going to kind of jump ahead again for a minute. If someone were to say, someone didn't know me, and you were going to describe me to that person, and you ask him, what does he stand for? What are his things that he's really passionate about? So you'd know, I would hope, certain things about me that you know that I'm passionate about. Netflix, sleep. But why? Why would you know that? Because you hear me talk about them. whether it's about Medinat Yisrael and about whatever it might be, you hear me talk about that. So it's part of who I am. So it wasn't just that these rabbis were saying, okay, this is how you have to treat this person. This is what you have to do in life. This is what their MO was. This is who they were. This is their essence. And it came out. Hu Omer didn't mean he just said it. It means he lived it as well. And he always was known by that.
There was also a loss of closeness.
Meaning?
To the Masorah. After they were
definitely
exiled. There was also a big piluk between.
Right. Well, you had the whole thing with the Prushim and Tzdukim, the Pharisees and Sadducees, which again, Jewish history class I would get into, but it won't. But but you made a very important point about getting away from the Masorah. The Masorah is the moment we get the Torah and Har Sinai. The farther and farther away we get every day, the less and less clarity there is. That means that even though for all of us who knew either personally or of Rav Moshe Feinstein, his amazing amount of Torah knowledge, or Rav Yashiv, or whoever, just fill in the blank, they didn't come to the toes of someone like Abaye and Rava and Shmai and Avtalyon and Hillel and Shmai, not even to the toenails. And it's so hard for us to understand it. Why? Because they were so much closer to the original Masorah. They also had more in their brain, and they also were able to have a capacity to house more information, let's just say. So what happened was that this time period in Israel, the center of Torah learning early on, we talked about last week, is Yavne. Yavne is, still I have a niece and nephew live there. In the city of Yavne, that's where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked for permission to reestablish a Jewish center there because Yerushalayim was destroyed. And the agreement was you can do that, but you can't rebuild the temple, you can't do anything else. And of course, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted certain things, which we already talked about, which were to be Zecher LeMikdash, things to remind us of how things were done at the Beit HaMikdash or about the Beit HaMikdash, such as the leaving a place by the door unpainted, using lulav, that's I pointed, using lulav all days of the week of Sukkot, as opposed to just one day, which would have been the time of the Beit HaMikdash. Outside the Beit HaMikdash was just one day. So various things on the night of Pesach, Zecher LeMikdash Kilel, Kena Sahil Bizman Shebeit HaMikdash Hayat Kayam, Hayat Korech Pesach Matzah U'Maror B'Yachad. Okay, so Matzah U'Marim Yachluhu. So things that we have to this day that we don't necessarily realize that he instituted, and it became the spiritual center. But it's up north in the Galil where the Mishnah is really starting to be taught and spread. It doesn't mean it this way, but kind of you can picture from the Galil that the Torah is coming down into the area towards Yerushalayim. But a large percent of Jews are up there, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi lived up there. So therefore, the Mishnah is not only written there, edited there, but it's also begun its birthplace, and its growth is there as well. It brings us to the next Shalah, the next stage. Where we left off last week was talking about the 6 sections of the Mishnah, and I also made issue of that it's written somewhat in shorthand. It's also written clearly with opinions, but no conclusion. It says Rabbi Yehuda says this, Rabbi Eliezer says this. Okay, or so and so says this, and the Chachamim say this. Okay, so what does that do for me? What's the law? What's the halacha? So remember, keep in mind, I'm going to mention this multiple times between now and the time we get to the Middle Ages, and that is there's still no law book. There's still no book you can look up. What are the rules? Tell me what to do. What about the Mishnah? No, you get some ideas. But there's no way to say, okay, look in chapter this and this. It tells you all about how to make a shofar. Here's how you. There are built into the Mishnayot some of this information, but not in an orderly fashion where you can just follow it and say this is the halacha. Since it was left somewhat ambiguous, purposely, we come to the next time period, the time of the Gemara / Talmud. Whereas the rabbis of the time of the Mishnah were called Tanaim, remember, not Tanaim, which means conditions in Hebrew, Tanaim. The next time period, they're called the Amoraim, or an Amorah for short, in singular. We're going to talk about just for a few minutes what was the Gemara and what are the Gemaras. Okay, where's the word? Did I talk about in here where the word came from? Did I talk about that yet? Okay, because I recently, when I was away for Chag, one of the topics I did was something connected to this, and I did an explanation. So I don't remember what I said here. I didn't. Okay, so let's talk about this next time period. It lasts for about 300 years, from about the year 200 to 500. Let's put that in perspective. It started, let's say, approximately in the early 1700s and came till now. Okay, so you start thinking like the early 1700s. That's before the beginning of the United States. There was the Civil War. Just look at American history. Civil War. I don't want to use the Jewish history because it's got a lot of bad stuff in there at that moment. Civil War, and the growth of the United States until modern times, and with combustion engines and the computer revolution and everything else, and now AI. So we say, oh, it's 300 years. I like when people say, well, he lived around the year 1200. Okay, yeah, Zev Shan lived around the year 1900. It's like, okay, but as you're closer to something, the more precise you are, obviously, to it. So it's approximately 200 to 500. During those 300-year period, what are they doing? So they have all these Mishnayot, they have all these papers and works from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. They get spread around to different academies in Israel and in Bavel. In Bavel, there are many more Jews and many more Torah scholars in Bavel than in Israel. It's an important point. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. And what happens is they get these Mishnayot and they bring them into their Beit Midrash. The Beit Midrash, the cities that they were in had, to us, maybe some strange names. Humpadita, Sura, Neherda. These are cities where there were major Torah academies of learning. You had people who were the heads of the academies, names like, and some of you may have heard, Abaye, Rava, Rav, Shmuel. Parenthetically, if someone's called Rebbe so-and-so, like Rebbe Yitzchak, means he was in Israel. Rav means he was outside. Why? Because Rebbe was a title only given for Smichat Chachamim. Originally, Smicha, like I have Smicha, right? But Smicha was only given in Israel and not in Bavel. So they had a different way of whatever they did. So generally speaking, Rabbi so-and-so is Israel, Rav so-and-so is Bavel. Anyways, so they start teaching, they start learning, and they start coming up with these problems. It's like, what did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi mean when he wrote this? Well, the Chachamim said this, and Rabbi Yehuda said this. Well, what's the halachas? They have all these discussions. It's left. There's no Rashi yet. Rashi doesn't live for another. This is going to end in 500. Rashi isn't born until about a little over the year 1000 of the Common Era. So hundreds of years, no Rashi. It's not like you can look it up online. I'm not being facetious. Just look at the brains we're talking about. They had to deal with, and when they start quoting things from other places, and there was nothing to cross-reference. It was in their heads. So the discussions they held in the Beit Midrash were anything from the halacha of what it was to be, history, geography, astronomy, medicine, health. Every topic you can think of, every topic somewhere is in the Gemara. Where does the word come from, first of all, before I continue? What does it mean? So we translate as Talmud. What does Talmud mean? With the word limud, lilmod, to learn. But the word Gemara is an Aramaic word. And there's really, as far as I understand, no 100% certainty of the source, but I'll tell you the one I do know that is one that's said. Many of you are familiar with the famous story of Hillel and Shammai, where a guy comes to him who's a ger, so who wants to become a ger, one who wants to become a convert. And he comes to Shammai on Erev Shabbat while he's in the bath. It's not in the Gemara, it doesn't say that, but he was in the bath. And he says, I want you to teach me Torah. He gives like a few conditions, but the one we all know is teach me Torah while I stand on all of Torah while I stand on one foot. So it says Shammai dachafo. He pushed him into the wall and said, get out of here. Shammai was not the calmest of people. He didn't take mindfulness classes. Never. Okay, you should send him an email next time. And then he comes to Hillel, who also was taking a bath. Hillel comes out and says the following statement. If I said it last week, I don't think I did. Okay, good. What is anathema to you, don't do to your friend, which is the flip side of the Haftala Reacha Kamocha. He says like this: what is hateful to you, don't do it to your friend. The idach, everything else about Torah, perushahu, is just an explanation of that sentence. Zeal, go ahead. Gimor, finish on your own. So they say that maybe the word Gemara comes from that we're always looking to finish this teaching of Hillel. We always want to be expanding our horizons and growing and growing. You will never finish. There's no such thing as finishing everything. You can learn the Gemara, as many people have done, cover to cover. You still haven't finished everything. So that's possibly where it comes from. And the rabbis, again, at that time I said, are called Amoraim. There were some that kind of are split between the two generations. I think it was Rav. Gemara sometimes will say that Rav disagreed with the Tana. Rav really lived in the time of the Gemara. So how can he disagree with a Tana? You can't disagree with some generation that came before you. In other words, an Amora can't say, no, Rabbi Yehuda was wrong, and this is the halacha. It's a very general statement right now. Rav Avina gave a series of 11 shiurim, I think, this summer about that. So I can't just make one sentence out of it. But so how can it be that Rav can disagree with someone who came before him? The Gemara says, Rav Tana Upali. Rav is also a Tana and he can disagree. What does that mean? It means that he bridged both generations. So he still had knowledge of people from the prior generation, and he already was young enough to be part of the next generation. But I want to address something that, again, this is not disconnected from Pirke Avot. This is going to help us in understanding where Pirke Avot comes from and how it fits in the grand scheme, which is there are two versions of Gemara. When someone says, I'm learning Daf Yomi, 99.9% of the time, they're talking about Talmud Bavli. The Talmud that grew in Bavel, again, say Bavel, it means Persia, which means today's Iraq, approximately the year 200 to 500. At the same time, in Israel, remember I mentioned there were so many people and many more rabbis living in Bavel? Well, they still had rabbis in Israel, and they still had rabbis and students in Israel. And they still had the Mishnah for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi because it was born in Israel. They're also working on the Mishnah. And concurrently, they are giving birth to what becomes known as the Talmud. You have the Talmud in Bavel, but it wasn't Yerushalayim. It's actually from Tveria mostly. Why is it called Talmud Yerushalmi? Deference to the city of Yerushalayim, because that's the focus, of course, of Israel, the main point of Israel. So you have Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. Why does one become more popular than the other? What are the differences? Now, I've given shiurim on a lot of like an hour shiur just on that. So I'm gonna do it in just 2 or 3 minutes, like highlight some bullet points here, because for what we need, you don't need this whole background. I think the obvious answers to why Talmud Bavli is more popular than Talmud Yerushalmi is because of the fact that there were a greater amount of rabbis that worked on it. It was more well versed. It was edited. That's one thing, is a big giant difference between Yerushalmi and Bavli. Yerushalmi was edited by 2 people, Ravina and Rav Ashi. It was really the next generation called the Savoraim that finished smoothing things over. But pretty much by the year 500, the Talmud Bavli, as we know it, existed already. And it had a tremendous amount of editing, fixing, and yes, there are sometimes disagreements. Well, this really meant this, but for the most part, it's edited well and it's organized. Then you have, and the way it works in Bavli, though, if you are a very linear thinker, which means you need A, B, C, D, Gemara will drive you insane. Bavli will drive you nuts because they'll do something like this. Say, what is the rule if someone walks outside the Eruv on Shabbat too far? Oh, since we mentioned Eruv, by the way, there's something also we talk about. All Jews are responsible for one another. Oh, wait, we're talking about Jews? Well, let's talk about the difference between Jews and non-Jews. Oh, if we're going to be talking about that, let's already talk. And it goes on and on and on. And finally, it'll say, my have alda. What happened to the original question? Dude, like, get back to the story. So you can go pages and pages sometimes. Like, you don't remember what you started with. You know, it's free association. It's exactly what it becomes. So that's like all over the place. There is an order to it, but it's something you have to get used to. Yerushalmi, A, B, C, D. It's very linear. Not only that, in the Bavli, if someone asks a question that seems to be like a little wacky or out of place, let's say we're in the middle talking about Eruvim on Shabbat. Okay, the Eruv around the city, and someone happens to ask a question about Borer, picking things, choosing things. So they'll say, okay, we'll talk about Borer, let's talk about it. In Yerushalmi, it's not that they don't even answer. It's like he just sits there with his mouth open, like, okay, I guess I'll just sit down now, right? There's no answer to it. Very, very often, the questions asked in Yerushalmi, not even answered. The biggest problem with Yerushalmi is that it wasn't edited hardly at all, or the Zikin was the one area that had the least amount of editing, so it was off-putting to a lot of people. I've been learning. I'm finishing up, thank God, my third cycle in Yerushalmi next year in January. Not this one, year from January. I really like it, not because I'm a linear thinker. I'm not. I'm both. I think I do both linear and kind of all over the place. But because I find it more of a challenge. The language difference also. is important to know. Mishnah was written for the most part in Hebrew. It was written here in Israel. You'd think that the Gemara here, the Talmud Yerushalmi, would be in Hebrew, and Talmud Bavli would be in Aramaic, because that was the language of the country. So they both are actually written in Aramaic, but a different the Aramaic was influenced more by Persian Aramaic in Bavel, and here by Greek and some other languages, and therefore they're different. It's a matter. Think about someone coming from Atlanta, Georgia, talking to someone from Liverpool. Okay, now they're both speaking English, if you call it English, but it can be very hard to understand each other. There are phrases that are used commonly. If you learn Gemara Bavli, the Talmud Bavli, there are phrases that are used literally thousands of times. Tashma, come in here, which usually introduces an attempt to prove something. In hachinami, yes, that may be the case. Those phrases don't exist in Yerushalmi. They have other ones that are similar, but not the same words. So you have to almost learn a new language. So a person, a guy or girl, man or woman who learns Gemara, whether, let's say Bavli for the sake of it, who speaks English, speaks Hebrew, now also has an understanding of Aramaic. It's already 3 languages. Doesn't mean you can speak Aramaic, but it means you can understand some things of the Gemara, because sometimes what happens in the Gemara goes into what's called Agadita. Agadita are legends, lore, stories. Sometimes they're real. Sometimes they're just to be a mashal or a parable. And those are straight Aramaic. A lot of Aramaic is like Hebrew. If you know French, a lot of Spanish will sound familiar to you. If you know German, a lot of Yiddish will sound familiar to you. It's a similar idea. The Aramaic of Bavli, the Yerushalmi, have a close connection to Hebrew. So therefore, by the way, anyone know there's 2 words in the whole Torah? I think it's just 2 in the whole Torah. I'll give you a hint. It's in Breshit that are Aramaic, not in Hebrew. It's actually in the Torah. 2 words. I'll give you a hint. Okay. Nope, not Yitro. It's not in Shemot. It's in Breshit. Very good. Yes, one was Gal'ed, and the Hebrew name was, the Hebrew name was Gal'ed, it was Yagar Sahaduta. Yagar Sahaduta, the Gemara says, is Aramaic. It's spelled also in Aramaic, the Aleph at the end. So, very good. Okay, so this time, as the Gemara is growing in Israel and it's growing in Bavel, again, the more authoritative text comes out of Bavel. And therefore, when it is passed down from generation to generation, there are more shibushim, more mistakes and problems in Yerushalmi, because people are not using it as much, and much less in Bavli. And the Gemara that you picture, if you open a Gemara, and you look at what's called Tzurat Hadaf, the shape or the form of the page of Gemara. We have the Gemara in the middle, you have Rashi in the inner margin, Tosfot in the outer margin, and all kinds of other commentaries. That was instituted, anyone know when? Where? Where's over there? In the Wadi? Huh? No. It had to do with print. It had to do with print. But where? Not when they first printed it. The first printing was the late 1500s, and this is about 200 plus years later. More than that, actually. If you look in what's called a Shas Vilna, meaning in the city of Vilna, Poland, I think it's the early 1800s, the Achim Ram, brothers Ram, had a printing press. And all the Gemaras that we have nowadays that are in that format all started with Achim Ram in Vilna, Poland, which during World War II became, I know it's shocking, a base for the Nazis, Yamach Shemam. And they took over. It still exists. The building's still there. And I saw it when I was in Poland many years ago. So the Tzurat Hadaf, or the shape, the way we picture a page of Gemara, comes from there. It had earlier taken on some similar form, but they're the ones who really, so to speak, coined it. If you take a Gemara, open up any Gemara Bavli, and open up to the front page, or the cover sheet, very, very often you'll see Achim Ram, you'll see the name Ram or something of that nature. It's also known as Shas Vil. Remember Shas meant Shisha Starim, the 6 sections. Again, the Pirke Avot is in Nizikin, in one of the 6. So that's where the shape comes from. It caused a problem for our very dear friend Rav Steinsaltz Zatzal, because he did something radical. He translated the Gemara into Hebrew, which was itself a radical thing, but that was fine. But he changed the Tzurat Hadaf. He changed how it looked completely. He still had a general framework that looked like the one that Shas Vilna had, but it wasn't, because it was his commentary of Hebrew interlinear translation, and Rashi was up here and Tosfos was on the bottom, and they would put him in Chayrim basically for that. Like, how dare you do something like, you know? Long story short, you can buy both versions now. You can buy the one that has the original recipe and the new and improved that looks like Shas Vilna. Whatever. But what Rav Steinsaltz did before him, what Sensino did after what Steinsaltz did, and then eventually what Art Scroll did, was open the world of not just Gemara but Torah to millions of people who just couldn't do it, and that's phenomenal. I have my own personal beef with Art Scroll, but that's okay when it comes to Jewish history. But in many things, why? I think they rewrote Jewish history as to be slanted towards the Haredi world. They sanitize things also, right? If you were a Rebbe of something, you never had any faults. And that's why the Torah very specifically tells us things that Avram did wrong, that Yitzchak did wrong, that Yaakov did wrong, that Moshe did wrong, that Miriam did wrong. Because why is that Lashon Hara? Because we need to learn from it. We are human beings. Moshe did things wrong too. Okay, Halavai, I should have in my bank all the things he did well, and all the things I did wrong, I think it'd be okay. So they sanitized Jewish history and in many other areas as well. And also the translations of certain things. They just, it's very, very, very bad as far as like, just be honest. You can use the word sex. It's okay. Really, it's okay. Time. Okay, good. A couple more minutes. Let me just kind of finish this time period with it only needs like 2 sentences, this next time period, because most people who know something about Jewish history don't know about this one, this little brief one, because it's a blip. We talked about the time period leading up to the Mishnah, which is about from the year 3330 something or other year, right? Till about the year 200 of the Common Era. So it's a very long thing. 1800 years, or well, more than that. A lot of years. I'm not going to do the math in my head right now. Lots and lots of years with no Torah Torah Shabbat written down. Then we talked about a period about 210 years of the Mishnah, talked about 300 years of the Gemara. And they're known, there's the Tanaim, there's the Amoraim, and there's called the Savoraim, also known as the Rabbanei Savorai, I think they're called also. Who were they? It's a very brief time, not even 100 years. They bridged the time from the Gemara, the Talmudic period, the Talmud Gemara, to the next major time period called the Gaonim, the Gaonic period. Rev Hai Gaon, Rev Shvira Gaon. We could talk about them next time. They're a very brief period. They're the bridge. What they really did was they took the edited version of the Talmud Talmud Bavli, and they made it even more precise and make sure that there were less and less any kind of errors. Keep in mind, again, this is still hundreds and hundreds of years for a printing press. This is all by hand, which makes it that much more sad when we talk about very briefly at some point what happened in the 1200s of the burning of 24 cartloads of the Talmud, handwritten 24. Imagine you have a library you have 24 so you have a set of shas, right? In those days, it would have been much bigger than we have today because it's handwritten, so therefore will take up more space. And they had 24 cartloads piled up high, all burned to the ground. And there was one man, Maram Merutenberg, who basically, from memory, rewrote the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, we'll get to that. But right now, it's for those who came in late, I said I have to leave early. I have somewhere to go. We're going to stop here. The Savoraim were this group of people who, the Rabbanan Savorai, they also made certain takanot, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but they do these takanot, and they also mostly work on the fixing up and making sure the Gemara is as clean and neat as can be, which leads us to the time of the Gaonim. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, is Gaonim and Rishonim, I hope. We will get to Pirke Avot. I promise you, I thought it'd take us 2 or 3 classes. It will take 3 or 4 probably. And then we'll get moving on Pirke Avot. Okay, time to breathe.